Do you ever wonder whether leadership is earned, grabbed, or confirmed by God? Notice this: after a bitter rebellion, God settles the question not by argument, but by miracle. A dead staff buds, blossoms, and bears almonds. In Numbers chapter 17, we'll see how God confirms true mediation and why life out of death is the mark of His choosing. And I'll give you one immediate practice to posture yourself under God's appointed leadership. In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, this show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So Numbers chapter 17 follows the devastation of Korah's rebellion. The community has been shaken, as we saw in Numbers chapter 16. The people grumbled, leaders were judged, and there is now an air of anxiety about who truly represented God, right? And now God instructs Moses, gather your staff from the leader of each tribe, label it, and place them before the tent of meeting overnight, and see which staff is going to bud. In the morning, Aaron's rod has budded, blossomed, and produced almonds, and the miracle is then kept as a sign before the testimony to silence further grumbling. So this chapter is God's decisive confirmation of priestly authority and a corrective to human ambition. Okay, let's read the first 5 verses. The command here is to collect each tribe's rod and inscribe names. Okay, first 5 verses. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and get 12 staffs from them, one for each ancestral house, from all the leaders of their ancestral houses. Write each man's name on his staff, and write Aaron's name on the staff of Levi, for there shall be one staff for the head of each ancestral house. Place them in the tent of meeting before the covenant where I meet with you. And the staff of the man whom I choose shall sprout. Thus I will put a stop to the complaints of the Israelites that they continually make against you." Now your question might be, why does God use a dead wooden staff as the sign? But the biblical unlock here, and the first one of this episode, is that life comes from death. That is to say, a staff is cut wood, completely lifeless, but God deliberately chooses something dead to demonstrate that true authority comes only from His power to bring life. We'll see this in Numbers chapter 17 verse 8, which we'll see in this particular chapter. Aaron's rod is going to bud. In Ezekiel chapter 37 verses 1 to 10, the dry bones become life again. In Romans chapter 1 verse 4, Paul writes that resurrection power defines God's rule, that God is teaching Israel that the leader He chooses will be marked by life-giving power, not by human ambition. And Jesus Himself, when we read about Him in the New Testament, is declared Son of God by the resurrection from the dead. And just as Aaron's rod proves divine selection through life appearing from death, Christ's resurrection proves His eternal priesthood. Okay, let's read verses 6 to 9 now. Verse 6, Moses spoke to the Israelites, and all their leaders gave him staffs, one for each leader, according to their ancestral houses, 12 staffs, and the staff of Aaron was among theirs. So Moses placed the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the covenant. Then Moses went into the tent of the covenant on the next day. The staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted. It put forth buds, produced blossoms, and bore ripe almonds. Then Moses brought out all the staffs from before the Lord to all the Israelites, and they looked, and each man took his staff. Okay, so what did we just see then? It's very important. So the first thing we saw from verses 6 to 9 is that the representatives here are not just symbolic, that what you place before God represents your tribe and calls you to a collective responsibility. So each leader's rod is laid before the Lord, and a leader's sign is not a private property, it stands for the entire community. To put your name on a rod before God is to allow God to judge on behalf of the people. It makes leadership accountable and representative. But that's not the key here. The really important unlock from this chapter is the next one. Why almonds? Take a look at it. It put forth buds, produced blossoms, and bore ripe almonds. Only the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi did it in this way. Why almonds? Well, the Hebrew word for almond is shaked. and it is linked to the word for watching, shoked. In Jeremiah 1 verses 11 to 12, God uses an almond branch to signify and symbolize that he is watching over his word to perform it. Aaron's rod producing almonds reveals three things. Number one, God is watching over his covenant. Number two, God himself confirms his chosen mediator. And number three, the priesthood is sustained by divine faithfulness, not by human inheritance. And what is the Christological fulfillment in this? Jesus Christ is the eternal high priest whose priesthood is guaranteed by God himself. Okay, let's read the final three verses. Yes, this is a very short chapter, verses 10 to 13 now. And the Lord said to Moses, "Put back the staff of Aaron before the covenant to be kept as a warning to rebels, so that you may make an end of their complaints against me, or else they will die." Moses did so, just as the Lord had commanded him. So he did. The Israelites said to Moses, "We are perishing, we are lost. All of us are lost. Everyone who approaches the tabernacle of the Lord will die. Are we all to perish?" Okay, so why do we need to preserve this rod permanently? It says there, right? The Lord said to Moses, "Put back the staff of Aaron before the covenant to be kept as a warning to the rebels." That's what it is. It is a warning. The rod is stored before the ark as a continual reminder that God has already chosen the mediator, and rebellion is ultimately rebellion against the mediator that God himself has confirmed and appointed. And Hebrews later confirms that the budding rod was placed inside the ark of the covenant, symbolizing the permanence of God's chosen priesthood, because we remember that the ark of the covenant, that is the meeting place between God and mankind. And Jesus Christ is the one who stands eternally as the only mediator between God and humanity. 1 Timothy chapter 2 verses 4 to 5 says, "For there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus." And this is important because what we're seeing here is it's a perpetual sign. Verses 10 to 13 is telling us something really important. Once God has acted, human grumbling must stop. The faithful posture here is trust, not second guessing. We remember way back in Genesis, when Lot's wife turned back, looked behind herself because she was second guessing. We saw in Revelation chapter 3 verse 19, we saw that you can neither be hot nor cold. You need to be all in for Jesus Christ. You cannot be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You have to be all in for the Lord. And Moses tells the people to stop their complaints and trust the sign that God has given. The miracle ends the debate. God has spoken. The people are now responsible to accept God's appointment and to live under it. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Alright, so we saw that Aaron's budded rod points forward to the one who proves his priesthood through life out of death. The ultimate confirmation of mediation is resurrection. Christ's resurrection vindicates his priesthood and secures the people's access to God once and for all. Why? Because in Hebrews chapter 7 verse 17 we read, "Christ, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." Now, I want to just point out something here as well, which is really important, because the author of Hebrews was a genius of the Old Testament. He was able to quote backwards and front. It's important because in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 4, he actually quotes Numbers chapter 17, and he writes, In it stood the golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant, overlaid on all sides with gold, in which there were a golden urn holding the manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. All of these are stored inside the ark of the covenant. What is the implication here? That inside the ark of the covenant, which is the meeting place between God and mankind, these three things, manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant, God's character, God's appointed and chosen leaders, and the bread of life are all present within this one area. This is the importance of this particular chapter, and the importance that vindicates who God's character is. Because if you recognize what I said right at the beginning of the chapter, that the staff was a dead wooden staff, which was completely lifeless, but God deliberately chooses something dead so that he can demonstrate that true authority comes from only his power to bring life into the dead things. In the same way he brings life to the dry bones. In the same way he brings life to this rod. And in the same way he brought life to his one and only Son by resurrecting him from the dead. Alright, so how can we apply what we learnt in today's chapter in our everyday life? I think we need to check our heart posture. We can even take 5 minutes to check our heart posture. You need to list one area where you feel like you're tempted to promote yourself or undermine an appointed leader. Something we need to remember is God's appointed leader is one which he watches over. That's what the almond and the Hebrew represents, right? Someone who is watched over by God, someone who's appointed by God to be in their position. So, if you're tempted to promote yourself or to undermine an appointed leader, you need to ask yourself, am I cultivating life or am I stirring death? Obviously, there are times where leaders are out of line. There are times where you need to criticize those in power. You need to ensure that there isn't an authoritative dictator who's managing everyone, right? And making sure that he is the only one who is exalted. But the way you can determine this is by recognizing, is this man exalting himself, or is this woman exalting herself, or are they exalting God? The difference is clear, and it is quite easily recognizable. Now, if you're stirring death, if you're just hating on a leader just because of your own personal discontent, you need to stop. You need to pray for humility, and you should not speak the complaint out loud, because remember in Numbers chapter 16, Korah spoke his word out loud. He was like, you know what? I'm going to seek your position. Why are you the one who gets to have this level of authority, Aaron? Why are you, Moses, the only one who can mediate between God and mankind? Why is that? And because of his ambition, because of his escalation, it became public and it became known to God. And guess what? God dealt with him harshly. And the second thing I want you to do is, I don't know, for the people who lead groups, you need to have a brief, visible reminder of God's rule. Have a quoted verse or a displayed charity list that names your community values. You need to constantly keep returning to these values, because we as humans will forget very easily the things that have happened in the past. Why do you think God asked Aaron to keep his rod near the Ark of the Covenant, which is reinstated in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 4? Why? Because you need to remember. You know what else is in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 4? The manna, right? The golden urn holding the manna, Aaron's rod, and the tablets of the covenant. Why are all three of these things mentioned? Because they need to remember these three events in history, right? In Israel's history, they need to remember. Why? Because we would forget otherwise, right? So this is really important. Remembrance and checking your heart posture. Alright, well, that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. Next episode, we'll move from signs to supply. We'll see how God continues to guide and provide for Israel as they march under the cloud which represents his presence. We'll watch how presence and provision stay linked on the journey in Numbers chapter 18, so you don't want to miss it. Anyway, so thanks for listening. Numbers chapter 17 teaches a hard but quiet truth. God settles the question of authority by his life-giving power, and a people's response must be trust, not second-guessing. Do the 5-minute posture check. Stop any soft undermining. Pray for the leaders in your life. Even if you have discontent towards them, pray for them and choose to support God's appointed way. And smile, you've taken a small but decisive step towards peace in your community. Tell one trusted person what you'll do and let them hold you accountable. Until next time, live under God's yes, not under your own ambition. Also, don't forget to follow and rate the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot. You can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.